Thank you, guys. It's great to be with you. I'm a Kellogg grad myself and really proud to be one. It's a wonderful time to be part of Kellogg. There's so many great things happening. And one of the things that I'd like to talk about is big data. What does this mean to business? What does this mean to our lives? And in particular, what should we anticipate? Because I see various ways that businesses can use this data in very creative ways. I thought we'd start with something that's happened already. I'm sure here we have a lot of Netflix users, is that right? Fantastic. Netflix is a great example of how the media industry has not only become digitized, but it's become measured. And so if you have a Netflix account, you've participated in some data, and this is in fact Netflix's data. And one of the questions that they would ask, presumably by you setting up an account, is what is your favorite movie of all time? And if we answered it with my favorite movie of all time, which is The Godfather, best movie of all time, of course, and you'd say, well, we could find other movies based on that genre, based on what people find interesting in that movie, and not just the gore, but maybe the human emotion, and all sorts of other things that come into play. You could imagine there are other movies like that, and then maybe other movies, and certainly this is not an exhaustive list, but we go down here and sort of, Sweet Home Alabama doesn't make the cut, right? So the idea now that Netflix as a company can take the data that it has about all of us and create an image that's customized to you, this is extremely powerful. Mass customization is powerful, not because they've just measured you or me, but they've measured all of us. And all of that information is useful to improve predictions, recommendations, and various other things that we'll talk about and what Netflix can do with that information. We will see mass personalization in other industries, medicine, for sure. We were talking about a startup in grocery stores and people's taste in food and lots of other consumer packaged goods. I think that's upon us. Things that Netflix handled especially well and features about big data that are interesting for us to consider. We mentioned mass customization and this notion of customer behavior modeling. One of the things that Netflix could do that Blockbuster could not is they could first determine, did you actually watch the movie? And technically, they don't know if you saw the screen. They knew if you played it. And they measured when you played it, the time of day. And it was really interesting that when phones came out that could play Netflix movies, and it was, of course, possible to open up a Netflix app on an iPhone or a Galaxy phone, that we recognized people were consuming media, especially in cities like New York and Chicago, all during the day. I guess they're supposed to be at work, or they're on the train, right? And so there are lots of other places that now the media can be consumed. And maybe you don't have time for, The Godfather, but you have time for 15 minutes of something else. And I can begin to position that kind of content to you. And so now use of a computer, use of media can be measured very precisely. And so measuring the customer is valuable to Netflix, not simply because they want to get to the customer better, but this information says something about the whole media industry. If I'm a movie house, Sony or Universal or MGM or any one of those big ones, making a movie is a risky proposition. What makes a good movie? Well, it's not easy. You've got actors and you got to get all the kind of expenses and scenes and filming. And so nevertheless, if we went to Netflix, they could tell us, based on the aggregation of what people enjoy, what would make a good movie. They could also tell us, for a movie that was produced 20, 30, 40 years ago, who might actually want to watch that movie. And that's actually really interesting. I'd like to hone in on that example for a moment, because that's really about an asset. For a moment, if I'm CBS or I'm Sony or any of these companies that owns a movie from, say, the 80s, and you say, well, it's sitting on a shelf, literally. Now I take it and digitize it. So, well, I don't really want to spend a lot of money advertising this, but who would reuse this? Who would be interested in it? And we would think of this as marketing as sort of the long tail. That movie owned by CBS or Sony is an asset. Now Netflix has a view on the value of that asset. That's tremendous. Asset surveillance, that's a very important concept. In fact, it is part of a Nobel Prize in economics. And so when I think about data and the kind of data that Netflix has and other companies that I'd like to talk about today, their asset is data. In fact, if we were to buy Netflix, and I have this kind of joking conversation with one of my colleagues in accounting, and he said, well, of course, Russ, you buy the company, you do discounted cash flow analysis. We could probably hire someone here at Evercore to help us with this, and this is what Netflix would be worth. And fair enough, we'd come up with a number. I would argue that that number will be inflated, and of course we pay a premium to acquire a company, largely because of the potential of this data asset. There has never, in the history of media, been the creation of a data set that has 1 billion ratings on 120,000 movies. That information doesn't exist anywhere else. You say, well, okay, YouTube and Hulu and other people are creating something like it. What's also interesting about these massive data sets that get created on industries, for economic reasons, we don't need two. Once we get one that's really big, there's not a need for a second or a third. And if there is a need for a second or a third, it's usually because there's some sort of price discrimination or some sort of coverage issue or something like that. So it's a winner-take-all model. I'll say a little bit about Netflix. I do some executive training for Microsoft in Redmond. They love Netflix, right? They are in a partnership with Netflix, and they look at Netflix as the kind of company that they would like to be able to be on the consumer side. They can measure the consumer, of course, what the consumer does with media. Did you watch the movie? Did you skip through a particular scene? Did you watch the scene a second time? All of those aspects, if you insert there for movies, any other form of media, sports, news, whatever that is, why do we watch any sports game or any television program that we don't want to watch today? I mean, with digital recording and all of the things that are possible, mass customization will feed us, I'm convinced, a customized stream of media. Customized in news, customized in sports. And I'll say a little bit about myself. I grew up in Florida, in Tampa. And we didn't have a lot of great years in football down there, but when we did, I'd watch those games again. And the NFL hasn't figured out how to charge that. But Netflix would know how to get to me and to you and whatever game or show you'd like to watch. Now, there are a few things about the data that Netflix is creating, dimensionality, that's very different than maybe what we had 10, 20 years ago. There's a velocity to this, and of course, that velocity is not unique to Netflix or media, so they know that you've done something, you log into the Netflix account, and quickly they have a set of recommendations available for you to respond to. Velocity in data is transforming lots of markets. Flash traders right here in New York and Chicago, real-time store offers. You walk into Target. Target's got a program with Wheelcart, and so they determine it's your phone, that phone's been in before, they want to send a special message just to you based on your being in the store or where you have been before. That kind of real-time offer is becoming more commonplace. I think of this also in the dimension of precision. So one of the things that Netflix knows, and I think it must scare Nielsen tremendously, they know in particular your name, your address, the number of people in your house. And if you watch cartoons like we do in my house, that you have kids. Now, when Nielsen builds their graphics and data for all of the views, okay, these families have a demographic profile, they use an average and they use something about a zip code and all of that. What's interesting about Netflix is I've exposed all that information to Netflix. They know that perfectly. And so they don't have to make an assumption. They don't have to make any approximation. That precision is already there. And so if Netflix wanted to partner with, well, most any kind of company, or maybe even a political campaign to say, I'd like to find families that live in urban areas or suburban areas or whatever that happens to be with children that watch certain types of shows and may have, particular views, they could do that with great precision. Another concept that I find exciting in the area of big data is what I call the fusion of data. And the example that I find most interesting here that we've probably all somehow participated in is Zillow. And so if you go to Zillow, you put in your address, and it has a number for your house. And if that number is not sufficiently high to make you feel good, then you think Zillow sucks, okay? And then, the other way you use Zillow is, what's this person at work making? So you put in their address, you divide by 5, and you get their annual salary, okay? Sort of the banker's check on what your income might be. But, and Zillow says we have this fantastic algorithm that measures the value of your house, and on a weekly basis, you can get Zillow updates that say your house went up 2% or 1%. And I find it as a statistician particularly difficult to appreciate, okay? But what I do think is fantastic and a tremendous accomplishment is they have taken hundreds of thousands of municipalities and counties all over America, publicly available information, taken that and fused it with the information that you might load up and say, hey, here's a really nice picture of my house and my bathroom, and I'm trying to sell my house. That has never been done before. That ability to bring information on properties at a scale. And it's no surprise that they bought Trulia, and well, we don't need 5 of these, right? Redfin's still around, but we're not going to have a huge number of these. There will be 1 or 2. And so if you need information about properties, they're in a tremendous position to provide that. Now, it's interesting when you think about data, and at least the way I think about it, it leads you to various dilemmas. And here's a little toy example that I like to start us off with. Suppose I own a billboard. You know, I'm the company, CBS or whoever, who actually owns the physical billboard. And you say, what's this billboard worth? And you say, well, I'd like to count the number of people who see it each day. And I could call your Department of Transportation and probably get a very inadequate response. And maybe I'd hire some unemployed students or something like that and have them count cars, and that would be, you know, even more useless. What's interesting about this dilemma, somebody knows that by accident. Verizon knows that. AT&T knows that. The fact that we drive up and down the highway or walk up and down the street by a billboard that can be described by longitude and latitude, a location, their operation of the cellular network could be, that data could be inverted to say, I want to look at all the people in a period of time that transgressed that longitude latitude. What's also interesting about them is they have all the information, dimensionality that Netflix has. Precision, they know your name. They know where you live. They know other places you go. They know if you're a visitor from out of town. That all sorts of things that would suggest they know who watches that billboard. But no one asked them to do this. They ended up in this, I said, by accident, because they're just running a really good cellular network. So they have a view, potentially, on the value of this asset, of this billboard. And this is actually economically a very serious dilemma. What should they do with this data? One, they could sell the data to the billboard company. You say, wow, that's interesting. CBS would probably sue them and say, listen, you shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff on my assets. I didn't give you permission to conduct asset surveillance. They might say, you know, what we should do is have an auction. Just let whoever wants to buy it pay us the highest price. That's another possibility. They could go to the marketing companies that advertise on the billboard and say, I'm going to help you pick better billboards, and create a consulting company or some sort of, you know, firm that would advise them on location analysis. They could do another thing. They could keep it private and just start a billboard company and go around America and say, that billboard is underpriced. CBS, would you like to sell it? Oh, fantastic. I didn't know you wanted to get rid of billboards. We're interested in a few billboards. Now, the board and shareholders of Verizon and AT&T would probably be aghast that they would end up in businesses so tangential to that of the cellular network that they probably would put a halt to it. But you see, this is how Google operates. When Google says, I have a new data asset, I form a new business around it. And if it's a map or a car or healthcare or banking or whatever that is, I just get into a new business. And why am I in that business? I'm in that business because I have information about assets that other people don't. That's very powerful. And so we could do this with other types of assets. You guys all remember, you know, Illinois, it's sort of like that, right? And corn until you get up around the lake. Now, you know, we trade corn at the Board of Trade in Chicago, of course, and there are a lot of companies who are interested in corn, and it, of course, is one of the most widely used grains in the world. So production of corn is measured when the seed begins to be put in the ground. And in fact, one of the companies who has immense coverage of this is John Deere. About 73% of the U.S. crop of corn is put in by a John Deere seeder, and about the same number is harvested by one of their combines. And those pieces of hardware, if you would, that equipment, have sensors that actually measure the yield and the productivity as a function of time and space. And so, you know, there are a lot of interesting data derivatives that you could create here. If I'm a trader, obviously, you know, the way they think is I got to have all the data because, you know, if anyone else has it, I got to have it, right? There could be an edge in that. If I happen to be someone who sources corn, I make things out of it. I need to know where it is associated with weather deviations or productivity modifications because of farmer decisions, whatever that happens to be. So something that is seemingly disorganized, like thousands of farmers across America, now we have the ability to centralize and do that in a very valuable way. Now, the one that scares a few people, and I guess this would possibly scare you if you're in real estate, what's a building worth? If I could put a price on a billboard, how about this building? How about the John Hancock building in Chicago? How about a shopping mall? If I want to put a price on that, I'm a REIT, or I'm the owner of the property, or maybe worse, I'm the tax collector who, assesses taxes and says, I'm going to tax you not just on sales, but I'm going to tax you based on activity. And activity is going to be measured. Well, we, of course, could do that with the same sort of trick using cell phones. And if I were to buy such a building, you would be interested, maybe, corporate space is a little more difficult than retail space. I'd like to know what these, people are. Who comes to this building? What's its value? Its value is tied to who visits it and of course, how it can be used. Now, all of these examples have something in common, right? And so, this is one of the concepts I talk about in my book, is that essentially there's a data exchange. We don't realize it, but we're trading our information, be that location, movie preferences, anything that we do about ourselves or say about ourselves, we trade that to a company for services. They give us services. Netflix gives us recommendations. The cell phone company, of course, gives us cellular activity. And so along the way, these companies get to know something about assets. That might include us. You might have a wearable or something, gets to know something about you in a very personal way, but it gets to know something about a market. It gets to know something about a building or a billboard, all these other assets. And I find that very fascinating because so many of those are not properly priced. And if I bring new information to markets, we know from economics that I will raise the price. I will bring the right buyer to that market who has the desire to pay the maximum price. Now, a lot of things have happened around the area of sharing economy, Airbnb and Uber being the greatest examples of this. And you think, what do? They have one of these data exchanges as well. Of course, you go on, you rent your room, you rent your car, you have to create a little marketplace for yourself. You have to create an image and a reputation, a measurement even. So, you have to have a score. Your score has to be sufficiently high. And of course, I think of this in the context of what I would call an aggregation. They aggregate all of these rooms. They aggregate all of these drivers. Someone like Kayak aggregates airlines or hotels. Mint.com aggregates banking offers or loans, right? This kind of sharing of information is becoming very commonplace. And there's indeed an economic value. We get a better price. Someone comes in and says, I know more about you, or I know more about that room, or I know more about that driver or that ride. I'm willing to participate in that market condition because of that. Now, location is one of the dimensions that's really going to change a lot of businesses. The fact that we have apps on our phone, maybe you have email app or you have your healthcare app or whatever that is, that app and the way smartphones operate allows that company to get information about your longitude and latitude and other things that you might do. Not because you actively said, hi, I'm in New York today, and I would like all of my apps to know that. But the fact that my phone is on and it has hit cell phones looking to locate itself, even if I have not actively told these companies my location, they have, and I use the language, passively acquired it. And I think this notion of passive data capture is very, very game-changing because we live our lives now with digital systems. These digital systems are measuring us. And so that's allowing companies to create these same kind of measures about what we do and what's around us. I went to a talk once on privacy and, they're like, I don't want to have Big Brother in my life. I'm really concerned about where all this is going. But everybody in the room had a smartphone. So you don't need Big Brother, you have Little Brother. And you wake up in the morning and the first thing you probably do is you turn that thing on. And you say, what happened while I was asleep? I don't know what happened. I mean, people in China trying to reach you or something, but that could be true. So your location, your wake up time, your sleep time is measured passively, inadvertently, if you would, as a byproduct of your phone. And of course, if you have wearables, and I'm not here to suggest any of this stuff is bad. In fact, it's really good. That's my message, is that this measurement brings us value, and we should recognize it also brings firms value, right? So you can measure your health, you can measure your happiness, and for whatever it's worth, I think there's actually big problems in mental health that can be solved when people say, hey, you're depressed, and, the winter comes into Chicago, and, that happens probably to everybody in a little piece, little way. So you say, well, how do you fix that? Do you play better music? Do you have better, experience during the day? Are there things that you could do, as a healthcare professional to manipulate someone's experience for the positive? I really think there are, right? And so this kind of measurement can solve things, I believe, that are currently very difficult to solve. And of course, we know that Apple and Google and, a host of many companies are in this space. Another one that we should examine in the paradigm change that it can enable is Nest. So if you're familiar with it, it's this thermostat that sits in your house, and it regulates the heater and cooling function in your property based on your location or based on your presence in the property. So behind the scenes, it has a sensor that sort of determines, are you in the house? If you're not in the house, it uses less energy. And it has some artificial intelligence to determine what your work and life schedule might be and adjust the use of energy accordingly. Google purchased them. So essentially what it does is it connects your house to the internet. So your HVAC system is now connected to Google. And you say, oh, that's kind of cool, and I'm saving energy and you're saving the environment and everybody feels great. Well, the reason I consider this a game-changing paradigm is I can remember the days when I was a kid in Florida, and we had lack of electricity output in the summer because everybody had their air conditioner on. And some neighborhoods got their electricity turned off. And you say, well, that's pretty bad. Okay, so how did they decide that? I really don't know. But we could decide that now through a network like Nest. We could say, in your house, we're going to turn the power off at 3 o'clock or 5 o'clock, and whatever that happens to be, or create economic incentives. We actually have the functionality through this network that we have openly participated in to have our HVAC system regulated, turned off, if you would, by some governing body, that governing body being the power company or Google themselves. Again, it's not clear that that's bad, but it's also not clear that my interest or yours, or this individual interest, will be first and foremost. It could be an interest of the network. We want to reduce total consumption. We want to reduce CO2 output, or some other kind of network metric that might not necessarily map to your personal metric of comfort or safety or whatever that might be. There are a lot of privacy issues that come up with this. All of these examples raise privacy issues, and in fact, even something that seems as safe as Netflix has raised lawsuits in various countries, even in California, where using that data to differentially price or to treat customers in different ways, viewed as either a form of discrimination or a form of misuse of customer data. And there's a real challenge here. The challenge is that we as a society and a country have not legally defined privacy. We think we have with the Constitution. I'm not a lawyer or constitutionalist in that way, but we don't have a law that a company can go to and say, have I met the conditions of this law? In banking and in healthcare, there are industry-specific standards. But what Netflix did, and what Uber's doing, and all of these things, you say they could take that data and say something about you. They could publish that data. There's nothing that says that that's illegal. Now, in their fine print, they might say that they won't do that. But you see, my point is that there is no provision in the law preventing them from that or using that in some other way. I think companies that are embarking on this should be very transparent in what's done with the data. So if you use this data to create other good, maybe some language like that should be articulated to your customers so they don't feel offended or abused. Now, one of the companies I find most impressive is LinkedIn. And I assume you're on LinkedIn. I am. And it's actually fun. I find meeting people and seeing what they do and where they've been really interesting. So they've measured careers. One of the things that they've recently embarked on is measuring colleges, functions within a college. And this is actually taken from their webpage. So I went and I looked up management consultants. All of the people on LinkedIn, Harvard, MIT, Sloan, and Kellogg produce, in that order, the largest number of management consultants. And fair enough, it may not be a perfect sample, but if you're an ambitious MBA kind of person, you're on LinkedIn. Okay, so there's a pretty good coverage in my mind. So we can say where people are and where they came from. They did a little analysis in their Google or in LinkedIn labs. They said, where did all the Bear Stearns people go? Where did the Lehman Brothers people go? Where did the Merrill Lynch people go? And I guess they went across the river. Some of them did, or just across the street, right? So they actually could quantify, find people who had that as part of their work experience and the companies they're in. So many things that are interesting about this. You could say for a college, well, what degrees are best? If we did this and went all the way down to the 400th, college for management consultants, we could arguably put a price on that. If I know where workers are going, do I know companies that are surging and growing? Is that information that a trader might want to have? Is that information that I might want to have before an IPO, a company that's acquiring talent, or the type of talent that they're acquiring? That gives them a lens into the labor market that's unmatched. And again, to my point, I don't know when's the last time you called up Monster, but it's been a little while since I've been on it. So, there are not 4 or 5 of these. LinkedIn is LinkedIn's the monster now. Okay, so it's the big game in town. I love professional football, and college football. And Facebook did a little analysis. They didn't ask people, what is your favorite football team? In fact, they just went to their 35 million customers that had liked football, right? So the notion was that the customer articulated this, and this idea of passive data capture, that Facebook just took those 35 million and said, let's go analyze them and let's sort it by county. And so you can see some teams are more popular than others by geography, like the Dallas Cowboys. And even though we're here in New York, and it looks like just a little slither of one borough actually supports the New York Jets, but you get the idea. If I owned a franchise, this would be very, very important to me. Where are my fans? If I market to a franchise, if I co-brand with a franchise, if I'm even the athlete, if I'd like to recruit, and if we did this for colleges, I could say what counties or regions of the country might I have an increased ability to recruit. So it's another way of putting a value to an asset, putting a measurement to something that could not be measured before. And what's brilliant about it is we didn't have to do a survey. We didn't have to ask people, 10,000 questions and, all the kind of problems that happen with surveys. This is what people are saying already. So there are a few things to think about, these strategies that may be appropriate for your business. One is you keep the data very proprietary. And what do you do about it? You do Google, right? You just create a new business. You say, I have a whole bunch of data. I don't want anyone to see it. We're going to start a maps business. We're going to start a car business. We're going to start whatever that business might be. The next is you might trade the data. And actually, Apple is a great example of this. If you have an Apple product or you use Apple apps, they've created a marketplace. So these apps become a place where participants, companies actually get information on consumers, and they pay Apple some small price for that. Or you create, and I think this is the really interesting area, what I call a data product. When you go to LinkedIn now, I think it's fascinating. You don't just see your page. They have a little thing down here that says, 12 people saw you today. Here are the 12 people. Here's their, background. And here are 12 people that you might like to meet, right? Those are products. They have taken data and transformed it into a way I could consume, right? And this notion that people want to buy your data. I've given a lot of talks to companies on this. Very few people want to buy your data. They want answers to economic questions they have. And in the case of, recruiting or career development, where am I most valuable? What are the opportunities that are out there? Those kind of questions. LinkedIn can put a product there for that. Or in the case of the billboard, I can say what the billboard is worth. Now, there is a very bold move around data, and I like to think of this as kind of shooting the moon. If you really want to create a marketplace, really big one, and you want to be eBay or Amazon, the thing you have to do is give the data away. You made all this data, big data, huge data, right? You think it's really valuable. You want to make it more valuable? Make it free. You go to Amazon, you want to buy anything, you get all the reviews, you get all the prices, wherever this product's been purchased, sold, all sorts of information. You haven't bought anything from Amazon. All that information is put out on the market in the same way the New York Stock Exchange and Chicago Board of Trade has publicly available information about products that are traded. If you create a marketplace, it must be for the transparency of price and availability. In the absence of that, the market won't form. And so they have the ability to do that in a digital way. So what we should anticipate in the next few years and where we are now is this integration of data collection and the rapid movement of digital platforms like cell phones and apps in our life. And they promise, and I really believe it will happen, is that we will have a move toward automation. Driverless cars become one of those, but there are already industries who have automation in driverless vehicles. Cargo, They've got these great big trucks that take the rock out of the ore or out of the mine and take it to, where they're going to process it. That truck's not driven by anyone anymore. That's driven by a robot, right? And so you could do that at night too. And by the way, they don't make mistakes, or they don't make the same kind of mistakes. They make different kind of mistakes. But there will be a use of this data in operational replacement. You could think about assets now becoming dynamic. If you think, hey, what's this building worth? What's this billboard worth? What's your worth in terms of LinkedIn, right? What if LinkedIn had a measure there that says, we looked across, 10,000 jobs, and we recommend you as a candidate for the following, and this would be your salary range. People would pay for that. That'd be really helpful when you walk into your boss and say, hey, I'd like to renegotiate my salary. Look what LinkedIn told me I'm worth, okay? That'd be great, okay? So one of the things that I do is research how companies do this and what they need to have in place to get better at becoming a LinkedIn or a Netflix. And so to me, there are a few dimensions. And so you could appreciate that there are levels of quality in this, but one is the ability to source different types of data. This ability to now not just use text, but audio and visual and all the other kinds of data that we have, geophysical information. That data is used to create data products, that the company sees its data legitimately as a source for experimentation, for creation. Not everything LinkedIn makes turns out well, right? But they see that data as an opportunity to create new products. That innovation process, that's not something that all companies undertake and or have. They've got to have that focused on the data. And then, of course, they've got to have leaders who are really investing in this. This doesn't happen by accident. You've got to have very sophisticated and talented people and, of course, hardware and software in place. And so you've got to have people who buy into that and of course, agree to that. And then, what we talked about today, I really think the way to change markets and to create new markets is to focus on assets. When you think about what Airbnb and Uber did, people herald them, oh, they're so innovative and, game changing. I totally agree. They put a price on an asset and enabled that asset to be traded, sold, rented, whatever you want to call it, when someone else couldn't. That's worth a lot of money, right? And even LinkedIn's doing that in a similar way associated with talent. And then, one of the things I do is I spend time with companies. How do you do this? How do you form the team? What should that team look like? Where do you find the smart people and, the mathematicians and data scientists is a term that we would use for that. So that's a large component of it as well. So some of the things that I would recommend and for you to think about. So first is to create data products. No one wants to buy your data set, right? Someone wants an answer to a question. If your company is participating in big data or wants to, how can you passively measure things? Wearables, that's what it's all about. You put the wearable on, you don't have to tell the company anything about what you did. It measures it passively. And that's a fantastic form of surveying. Recognize that you may be in a position to conduct surveillance on somebody else's asset. That puts you in an interesting position. Maybe you should sell it, trade it, give it away, keep it private, right? And then, of course, claim that value through the data products. And then, of course, recognize that data is not a byproduct of your business. That's sort of how we thought about things many years ago, but it is an asset to your business. In fact, even a core component to its future growth. So those are my thoughts for today. I'm very happy to address any questions or anything that's on your mind. If you want to learn more about what I do and think about, those are my books and blogs, and I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn sharing my ideas, and you're all welcome to join my LinkedIn. And I really appreciate you coming out on an evening. I mentioned, you could all be somewhere else, but you were here, and I really appreciate that. So thank you so much. Great to be with you guys. Any questions? Yes, sir.
What is the significance of 1492 on your Twitter handle?
Well, it's interesting. Since Christopher Columbus Day is this week, there were a lot of other Russ Walkers taken. So I believe that I look at things about discovery. So, 1492, there are a few dates that everybody remembers in school. That's one of them. So, there you go. That's how I chose it. Good question. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, for companies that amass a lot of data, get people to subscribe free, what's their latitude on the granularity of the data that they can then share, for example, about individuals and individual preferences? Are there any constraints around that?
Legal constraints?
Yes.
No, virtually none. unless it's banking or healthcare. Those two industries have laws passed by Congress. But if Netflix said we wanted to publish all the people who watch, I mean, I'll make it a little provocative, okay? And I'm not trying to, pick political sides. I want to publish all the people who watch the Democratic debate, or the ones who watch the Republican debate, the ones who watch both, the ones who turned it off early. They or Comcast or any of the cable companies, they know the answer to that. They put that up. Maybe you say, I didn't want you to say something about what I might be doing or thinking. But that's entirely possible and entirely legal right now. See, I mentioned in a way that makes everybody a little uncomfortable, right? Because that's what I'm trying. Yes, exactly. There's not a law, right? And I'm not here to advocate for a law, but I'm saying if I were a company, I would feel uncomfortable doing that. But you could imagine someone would goof up in the company or say, hey, we're going to create a kind of new political index or do something that's going to garnish a lot of interest, but it could bring a lot of damage as well. Yes, sir.
When you consult with large corporations, do they have a sense of how valuable their data is, or how to best monetize it?
There are a couple of camps. So I've given a few talks in the Bay Area on this topic, and everybody there has a startup, right? So they all think they have the next Uber, and maybe some of them do, right? And if I think about some of the criteria that I presented, you've got to find an asset that you can better price. You can solve an economic problem. And I'm not sure that they can all do that. There are some people in another camp who say, I've got this big data set and someone's going to pay me for it. Who might buy a data set, like piles of Excel files or a database? Might be a very sophisticated company like Google. Who knows what to do with that data? But I don't think they're going to pay you a fair price. And so this notion that if you want to extract value from data, you can't leave it in that raw form. You've got to take it to a data product. You have to take it to an answer. Something that says, and I played this game and I said, hey, if you wanted to know, based on your background, what jobs in LinkedIn right now would you qualify for in the salary range, I bet people would pay 20, 50, $100 for that, right? And so that information LinkedIn has, they've converted it to answer a question, which is, what am I worth? Fair enough. But someone doesn't want the whole LinkedIn data set to try to go solve that themselves. And if they do, they're very sophisticated companies. They're not going to pay you par. Yes, sir. Yeah.
You talk about the importance or unimportance of owning the data.
Yeah.
So, what we're talking about monetizing.
This is an interesting question. So I use the example of John Deere. So their equipment goes over a farmer's land. The contract that they have with the farmer is that the farmer owns the data, even though it's sitting on John Deere as a server. And the farmer's entitled to use it to become, more productive or, more profitable, whatever that might be. But, the notion that this data could be assembled in a way that could create something that maybe even does the farmer harm. That's possible. And maybe the contract will be written differently someday. Say, you use our product, it sits on our server, so many things are going to the cloud. You say, well, someday we're all going to have cloud email. Do you own your email? Can they use the email for other things? Google uses Gmail to target market people in a very specific way, right? You'll get ads different than I'll get ads. And so, I don't think they're looking to take the mail away from you, or I don't think John Deere is trying to take that data away from the farmer, but they may have another interest in using that data. And ownership is going to be an issue. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I love your example of Netflix. However, today Netflix missed its earnings and their stock tumbled quite a bit. Do you think they have an opportunity around the whole concept of monetization of their big data that they haven't really gotten there?
I do. Okay, here's a little idea that if I were at Netflix, I would try to make this happen. When you make a movie, how do you make money on the movie? You sell number of views. There's another way you make money on the movie. You do brand placements. This is, Kellogg, right? We know how to do marketing, okay? So Coca-Cola, the actor or actresses picks up a Coca-Cola can. That's not by accident. The Coca-Cola company of Atlanta, Georgia paid some sum of money for that brand placement. Now, where do they get metrics on that now? They call Hollywood Movie Guild, they call Nielsen. How many people are going to watch this movie? A lot. How much am I going to charge you? A lot. Okay? I could make a contract that says I could tell you exactly which families are going to watch this movie with some, precision, but some error, and that the contract that I write with Coca-Cola will be a function of the number of views or downloads. Okay? Now, it gets a little more interesting as graphic arts actually improve. I was at a conference recently where they literally simulated a football play. So when I mean by simulated, graphically simulated, 11 guys on both sides, the stands. These were not players. This was all created by video art, graphic art. And it looked really fantastically realistic. So if we could do that, and right now it's very expensive, when that actor picks up the can, why has it got to be a Coke can? Maybe we should put it out to auction. Maybe your house, should be Budweiser, right? Whatever it would be. And you say, wow, this changes everything. Where I put the brand, what houses I want to go after. You already drink Coke. I don't need to advertise in your house. I'm going to advertise in someone else's house. That's going to be fantastic. I mean, brand placement, not just in Netflix. I mean, in a movie, I can do it in television shows. I could do it in the news, and it will appear within the content that you're enjoying. Yes.
What are the differences you're seeing in terms of organizations that are able to successfully get on the big data and monetizing track versus those that really can't get there or have barriers?
Yes, a great question. There are a lot of things you have to change organizationally. We have, for many years, had analytics in companies, especially in analytical marketing. So you would have a marketing function and a team that did marketing analytics. But they did just that. They solved one or two problems. And I worked at a bank, and we had a lot of mathematicians and statisticians, and they all worked on one problem, and that was it. What we see now is that companies create teams of data scientists, these very analytically capable people, and they set them across the enterprise in a cross-functional way. So you know something about marketing, and you know something about operations and strategy, so that the way that Netflix uses its data is not just about operations, but marketing. In fact, marketing and operations look like they're the same, and they use the same data. So you can't create silos. Instead, the analytical or the data science function has to be across the enterprise. And for some companies, that's really hard because they don't operate that way. And so if they stay in those silos, they keep solving the same problems. They may solve them in a better way and spend more money doing it, but the kind of integration that we talked about, like doing the billboard example, that's not going to happen because the marketing team came up with that or the operations team came up with it. That's because both are going to speak together. Does that help? Fantastic. Who else? Yes, please.
Are there any laws that stop people from scraping the internet and collecting data? For instance, I could go on Amazon and download all their SKUs and reviews and everything.
Well, that's not as easy as it used to be. There are trademarks and copyrights that would prevent you from doing that systematically. So if you went and you copied a whole bunch of Facebook postings, they would come find you. If you do a few, they probably wouldn't bother. But if you became of some size, and the other thing about that is they'd probably change their process a little bit to mess you up. You'd be racing, you'd be in a race. They're gonna change that frequently. But there are companies who do things like that, right? And one of them that I can speak to, there's a group of traders in Chicago who are trying to get ahead of the corn price, so they go scrape a whole bunch of Twitter tweets from farmers in Iowa. I really don't know what they tweet about, but they think, hey man, my corn's looking great, or my corn's not looking so good, that somehow that's going to say something about the price of corn in Chicago. So people are trying things like that.
Is there any precedence of court cases against people who are scraping such data?
Well, if you went to a bank and you scraped someone's web page, for sure, that's the copyright of the bank. I mean, the bank would have all grounds
that
to.
Would be secure, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, well, it depends how you're scraping it. I mean, where would you do the scraping? Within the browser, or they're
within the browser?
Yeah, I mean, it could be scraped. I mean, assuming you got through the security protocol, or if someone installed an app or permitted that, but the bank could legitimately say that that's copyrighted material. I mean, it's interesting, since I worked in the banking industry, You don't own your credit card. I don't own my credit card. That's the property of the bank. The data on the webpage is property of the bank. So, and that's an example where that legal ownership, I mean, a question about ownership, that's how you would stop that. Absolutely. Now, the example of Facebook, where they showed the football teams, well, that's a little bit of a gray zone, I guess. I mean, it's on Facebook's server, and is it Facebook's data or is it your data and mine that said we like, the Giants or whoever? And they didn't ask anyone's permission to do that, but they didn't reveal anyone's identity. So presumably no one saw harm. So one of the legal tests that has come up in the exposure of personal data is, has the individual experienced harm, economic harm? So if you remember about 10, 15 years ago, when all the companies were having their data breached, like the Cancer Society and, all these kind of, even not-for-profits, and they'd say, oh, we'll give you a year of credit monitoring. Your credit card is going to be monitored for a year. And so then there were a couple of cases that came up, and some companies pushed back on that, and the judge said, well, no damage has been done. No remedy is necessary. Remedy is necessary when damage is done. And so the problem in that, at least as I see it, is that your privacy's been invaded, but the court hasn't acknowledged that as a loss, because we don't have a law in that space. See my point? Like, if you say, well, I was violated, my privacy, my content was published, the judge will say, yeah, but nothing bad's happened to you, right? Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about information bottlenecks? It seems right now that if you want to get GPS data, you either have to go through Apple or through Google with their Android phone.
Yep.
If it's web data, you're going to go through either Netscape browsing data, or how do marketers not get held up by the owners of those bottlenecks?
No, they control it, my friend. It's there. How many legitimate cell phone networks are there in the world? I mean, you name two of them. Maybe the next one down is Windows, but I haven't seen a Windows phone in a while. So, yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot of them. You want to be on a smartphone, you want to reach a customer in that manner, you do Android or you do smartphone or iPhone, or you do both. You get an app, and part of your business is going to be surveyed by Google or Apple, and you may have to give some revenue up to them, or you have to pay them. Yeah, that's the reality. I know that's uncomfortable, but make your own network then, right? I mean, that would be, and you say it's really challenging. Yeah, it's really challenging because it's not that I can make a better network. It's that I have to make a better network that people want to get on. The customer wants to get on, right? And that's the power about these, is that they're self-reinforcing. If you said, and I said, we're going to make a better LinkedIn, whatever that would be, it doesn't get better until we have about as many people as LinkedIn has. So the value isn't to the person who's consuming the data. The value is to the user. How much does the user pay? Zero. That's the problem. What these companies have done is they've capitalized through that period of building it, and then of course they have these secondary forms of monetization, sell the data, create data products, advertisement, other things like that. It'd be very difficult to challenge one of these kind of networks. Yes, sir.
The subject of bringing data products. I'm surprised that nothing has come up where, the owners, and there's not really owners of data since it's public data gathered through passive means in a sense. But for example, when a lot of these companies, Google, are creating models, predictive models, analytic models to help them make better decisions. So Netflix as well, they're profiting from it at the benefit of.
Sure, Netflix and LinkedIn. Let's put it in a context of LinkedIn. Imagine everyone here has an account. You put a whole bunch of things on LinkedIn. You share all that information freely to LinkedIn. Then they will charge you for a premium product that says if you'd like to, do a job search or you want to meet people, we'll charge you $59 a month or whatever the price is. They didn't pay anything for the data collection. People gave it to them. This is the best model, huh?
They're a consulting unit too.
They're a consulting unit, of
so
course.
they will tell you, Mr. Company, whoever you are, I can tell you where you got your people, and I can tell you where your people are leaving to go, and where all your intellectual property is walking out the door and helping your competitors or not.
And a recruiting seat at LinkedIn. So we did a little project with them, and you want to, use a LinkedIn product as a recruiter. That's $10,000 a year on data that costs nothing. It reminds me of like part of The Godfather. You know, a business, that's a good business. COGS are zero, you know, revenue's high. That's a good business to be in. Yeah, I mean, the data's free. And as long as you keep bringing the customer something interesting, which I think is part of their strategy, and they've been successful at it, you go to LinkedIn, what happened in the last day? Oh, 12 people saw me. Okay, I'm gonna check back next day or next minute, see who else saw me. You know, there you go. Like, it's self-reinforcing. It satisfies a human desire for you to share even more information. Please.
Has your area of research taken you to some of the work that's been done also for better or improved data analysis? For example, again with Google, right? They are able to not predict the future, but predict the present. For example, statistic numbers from the Department of Labor or anything from a government agency takes 3, 4, 5 months to get compiled and put out. Well, Google has so many different inputs that they actually predict, given a certain amount of trends. Here's where jobs might go.
It's interesting that you would ask that. There's a project that I'm aware of. I can only say a few things about it. The U.S. Census Bureau is partnering with companies like Google and MasterCard, because the U.S. Census Bureau doesn't just count people, they measure the economy in various ways. That's part of their mandate from Congress. And, you know, listen, once every 10 years doesn't really cut it anymore, okay? So, you know, MasterCard knows a whole lot about, you know, the tax base, you know, in Manhattan. Or, you know, other cell phone or credit card companies would know the same. So if you're, you know, the U.S. Census Bureau and you say, I want to say something about the health of the economy, well, that kind of data is very relevant, right? So, yeah, there are big projects underway for that. You could imagine if you were Google or MasterCard, you'd say, maybe I could do what the Census Bureau does better. I could publish, you know, I think about it every time I come to New York. I hope I don't sound like a Midwesterner, right? But, you know, I'm really from the South. Like, everything had to get on the island. You had to cross a bridge, right? You know, it is an island, right? So all the food, all the people, whatever. How many people are on the island at a given point in time?
Would another example of that be the ADP payroll and the
ADP is enormous. It's in my book. That example is used. If you want to know where jobs are being created and at what level, salary-wise, they know that. I think it's about 20 to 30% of direct payrolls are deposited by ADP. Yeah. And that information as a surveillance on the economy, but also companies. Look, if I wanted a long or short of stock, I'd really like to know something about ADP's hiring, you know, what it says about a company. And that would give you a particularly valuable lens, the health of that company. And not only that one company, but what's brilliant about it, and it's like the Facebook football thing, I can do all the companies or the billboards. So now I can compare them. Not only can I say the answer to one company, I can say, how do you compare to the best or the worst? You know, we call that rank order statistics. So then I can put precision to, is it acceptable?
Depth of payroll, are you paying people enough, whatever? Like
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I don't want to scare anybody, but it's kind of interesting to me that IRS just doesn't subpoena that information. I mean, they get a 1099, but, you know, I mean, if the government ever wanted to, as an act of Congress, say, you know, we just take your whole digital record, what was deposited in your checking accounts, what you spent on your credit cards, and, you know, we'll take care of the taxes. You don't have to work on it. We'll send you a bill. You know, we take it from here. It happens that way, I think, in a Scandinavian country. I believe it's Denmark or somewhere like that, where they collect, you know, everything's digitized and digital, so the government does it, and apparently you have the right to make your own formula, and if you come out less, and the government agrees, they'll accept it, but yeah, you never really win, right? That could be done. I mean, systematically, it's possible.
No, I was just going to comment that I think people would be pretty upset in this country.
No, of course, America's not for taxes, and I'm not either, right? Yeah, no,
And which brings up a bigger question of, it seems to me that most people in the country don't realize all the data that they're generating is being used by all these.
Huge.
And then it's obviously right now is a benefit. But at what point does there start to be a backlash of people saying, do I really want my MasterCard data being, you know, put up to the IRS? I mean, that's an extreme example, but just, Google and LinkedIn, and Facebook having all this information on there.
I don't believe any bank is actively using individual information against the individual. There are laws there. But when I worked at Capital One after 9/11 and before the Patriot Act, we got a request from the FBI and the CIA to disclose the activities, credit card activities of hundreds of people, all with Middle Eastern names. And what were we supposed to do with that request? I mean, we decided to be a patriot and we disclosed it. Now that was against our, policy to the customer. Now those were, extreme events, but okay, maybe that kind of dilemma, social, ethical, whatever that might be, gets repeated in lots of small ways without the clarity of you should do it for the country. And so you could end up into a lot of missteps as a company. I think we're going to see more of that. I mean, personally, here's an example of one that's a very clever way to make money if you're a mafioso, right? So in the state of Florida, they have they call it the Sunshine Act. Anything that the government produces has to be published. So you get arrested or arraigned in jail, your photograph gets posted on a webpage. Fine. Mugshots.com takes those, scrapes those off, puts it up there, searchable by your name, and says, if you'd like to take that off forever, that's $1,500. If you'd like to take it off for a year, it's only, $25, right? Whatever it is. And so you're like, that's a clever bit. Cost of goods is zero. Remember, that's a good business, okay? So, you say it's a pinch. It feels like, a pinch. It is a pinch, but it's all about data. I'm controlling the publication of the data. I created a data product that disturbs you in a way. So disturbed that you're willing to open your wallet. The farmer could be disturbed. The billboard guy could be disturbed. You say, hey, you don't want me to publish the data on your billboard to your advertisers? Pay me $50,000. And I'll tell them that this is an above average billboard.
So I have a couple of thoughts to put out there that I'd like you to comment on in terms of the future of knowledge work. So we know that in the last 2 years, the advances in neural networks, machine learning, natural language processing have advanced sort of on the singularity university curve exponentially, more than they have in the previous 40 years.
Indeed.
We know the Internet of Things is coming.
Yep.
The amount of data that's about to hit us is going to make what we have right now look like a puddle compared to an ocean. In the past, we used to worry about robotics getting rid of labor, heavy labor, but it's a lot more complicated to build something that actually moves than something that just runs an algorithm. And once you've written it, that software is replicable like crazy.
That's right.
So there's one theory that actually the jobs that are at risk in the future from this type of data analytics and the Internet of Things processing are people sitting in this room.
Me too. Yeah, you
I'm
can have a
curious,
robot.
What do you think of that?
Well, I believe that it's a legitimate threat to many professions. Early in my career, I was an engineer. So, when you're an engineer, you learn how to do certain calculations. Those calculations you had to do manually. Then you could take them and do them in India. Now you can push a button. You set up a tripod. It creates all the survey numbers. Saying you're an engineer and you do surveying. I mean, that's not impressive at all. That's a $12 job. Okay, $12 an hour job. So the computer's doing all that for us, right? So it takes that job away. And so then, you're exactly right. A lot of those functions that were hard and required knowledge or intelligence are replaced by a computer or an algorithm with certain data. And usually it's not just an algorithm and data, but some kind of sensors. So, the tripod's an example. It has lasers and, it did it better than a human ever could. So, but it also costs less. Yeah, it's going to happen. I mean, if you want to read some very thought-provoking information about that, Bill Gates believes that artificial intelligence and automation, so these sort of go hand in hand, is a threat to civilization. And Larry Summers, I guess he said some not so pleasant things, but yeah, he believes the same. There's some serious economists, and I reference them because they put it in the context of, well, these things take jobs away, then what will the people do? Right? I mean, the good news is that we're not having enough kids to, fill the jobs anyhow. So maybe it'll all work out. But it is a problem. I mean, in fact, where Larry Summers gets to it as an economist is he says, well, you could have long-term deflation because you don't have increase in wages. That wages are restricted I'm summarizing it tremendously, right? But if you're always competing against a computer and a new level of computer, then why would I ever grow your wages? The economy is not going to bid up your salary. You're going to be changing jobs and sort of morphing your job, and there'll be some jobs that are worth a lot, like coders and programmers and people who run the robots, but that's a very small number relative to the population. It's a very, very interesting area. And you think about it in the context of even a car. So if a car is driverless, okay, so you say the first thing, the drivers go away. Okay, so no taxi cab drivers, so that's might even an improvement, right? Okay, but is there status to owning a car? If I don't drive it, what's a Jaguar mean? What's a Mercedes mean? I mean, it's just a pod that takes me around. I mean, it could have implications to brands. I mean, maybe you just say, hey, I got an Uber Lyft or what, took me somewhere, and poof, it doesn't matter what kind of car it is. That'd be really terrible if we made cars. The brand, not just the manufacturing of it. Anything else, guys? Yes, please.
Quick question. I guess it's the same kind of drill. You gave some examples. Do you have any political examples of how political parties or the political structure uses the data?
It's a great question. There's a group of data scientists, have a group called Civis at University of Chicago, and I guess they are run by the people who participated in the Obama campaign. And it appears the Democrats in the last two presidential elections were quite sophisticated about using data. Now, what I think will happen, this is my prediction and not a reflection of necessarily what they did, using the Netflix example, we know, as uncomfortable as it may be, that the presidential election is decided by some states and some counties, and if you're a Republican in San Francisco, you probably should stay home, and if you're a Democrat in Dallas, probably the same, right? So those aren't the swing votes. So if I'm a presidential, and I say this in the context of presidential campaign because the stakes are the highest. This is where the most money is going to be spent, right? Why don't we go after those homes, not with people knocking on the door? Why don't we get their Netflix data? Why don't we get their LinkedIn data? Why don't we get their Facebook data? We assemble all of that and say, what's the hot topic in your house? Is it the environment? Is it taxes? Is it immigration? Whatever it is, make a message. And if we are partnering with Netflix, that candidate can pop up on the screen in your house and say, what you need to hear. And in my house, the same candidate might have an entirely different message. Mass customization. That will happen in politics.
So there's no constraint on that.
That's not illegal. None of that's illegal. No. And if it were, why would that stop them? Seriously, that's technically all doable right now.
But in that example, the people who got elected could probably work on none of the things that checked out.
Yeah, there would be all sorts of things. I mean, you could just not waste your money on trying to win the votes in certain counties. You go after those, but in a very deliberate, customized way. Anytime we do this, there's some error. I'm not suggesting it's going to be 100% perfect, but we're not going to go do a county-wide profile and say, well, you live in the suburbs, so you must be really concerned about the environment or family values. We can just zero in on what you do on LinkedIn and what you say on Facebook and say, oh no, you're really concerned about, immigration. So there we go. Customized message to the house, delivered on your phone. I think it's going to happen. Yes.
Can you speculate, as you're talking about the personalized or the customized messages, what you think that's eventually going to do to the media? Because when you think of these news these 24/7, they analyze everything everyone says.
Yeah.
And so once it becomes more customizable,
it's going to destroy them. It's going to fragment it to the point that they're under attack. It's already happening for ESPN. They're already getting smaller. And you think, wow, someone who actually has a lens across all sports, they're getting picked apart by people don't want to watch media. They want to stream it. They want to get it from unique sources, right? And this is a generation younger than many of us in the room. So I think that's going to be the future. And I use as an example in my class, news is another form of media. Every time I say it, people are like, oh, you're either for Fox or NPR. I'm like, no, I'm for Wall Street Journal. That's where I want my news, right? And so if whatever your slant on news is, it doesn't have to be political. It could just be, I just want business news, or I want sports news, or international news. And so when I go to CNN, why does it have a homepage? I mean, you could kind of customize it yourself, but someday it'll all learn itself. Yeah.
Could you just share with us a little bit about what's down the road in home healthcare? As people age, a lot of people at home, they don't want to be in hospitals, they need care. How is big data already helping them now, and where do you see it going?
The example for this, a great question, is Japan. So Japan has a significantly older population than any other developed country in the world. They also have a history of not receiving immigrants particularly well. So that's another topic I talk about, world demographics. So, they have old people who need help, but they don't want to bring in maids from, Vietnam or Philippines for other reasons. So, literally, you're an old person, you get a robot. You have something that actually walks behind you, and you can touch its screen and it'll do some simple things like make a tea cup for you or something like that, and then keep track of other things like take your medicine and wake you up if you're asleep or if you're snoring or yeah, I mean, it'll be a bigger part of our lives. I mean, it'll be, what's that?
A robot saw.
There you go. Yeah, actually, there's a demographic reason for this, not just because we can do it technically. If we think about where the U.S. is going from a demographic perspective, and we won't be quite as old as Japan, but we will have more older people than we have younger people. So you're not going to live with your children like maybe 2 generations ago we did. And there will be a lot of people who either can't afford to go to elder care or don't want to, or legitimately shouldn't, but they have the need for some assistance. And that's going to come in the form of robots and other kind of metrics. Did you eat your food? Maybe a camera that actually looks at what you did in the kitchen, and then a nurse or dietitian actually looks at that and says, did you eat today? And you lied, but I said, no, you didn't eat today. And for some elderly people, that's actually a really big issue, is like taking in enough energy so that they continue to remain healthy. Yes.
Have you done any work identifying what is the right level of segmentation for an ROI? Because obviously, for example, you talked about the mass customization, and you can get as many segments as you can come up with. So
Right.
is there like a break-even point, like after a certain amount of segments, it's not worth being so segmented?
That's a really good question. I remember working with a couple of companies who wanted to do customer segmentation, and they had no segments. So we started out with 5. And you say, why 5? Because there's 5 fingers on a hand. Like it had nothing to do with analytics. It had all to do with simplicity. And if you wanted to do mass customization, presumably each customer is a unique segment. Now, what you're suggesting, and it's appropriate, is that the things I do to customers may have similar features, and I'd like to group them so that I get some economy of scale in my operations. So the answer is tied to the cost of the operation. But you see, the Facebook, the cost of the operation, COGS are 0. It's almost 0. But if I ran a store or I made a physical product like something that went into a store, it can't be individual. Medicine might be individual because there's going to be a really high premium for it. But if I make a package of go home and make a dinner or something like that, food, I can't make one for every person in the country, right? So, but there will be more of this kind of segmentation. But I would say the answer is tied to the cost of operations.
So none of these companies have APIs. Like Twitter has an API, and you can download all sorts of information
Right.
from there. Why do they make it free? Like that's.
Well, they want to create a marketplace. They want people to take the data and demonstrate its value.
But they just give it out for free.
Well, now they might, but I don't know that that's necessarily the case forever. Right. So I mean, they're struggling in some ways, right? So it's not clear that it should be for free. But if you want to get users, it's for free. I mean, for a long time, you could never buy anything at LinkedIn. It was only free. It's only a few years ago that they started having premium services, right? So, if you want to build a marketplace, remember what I said? Make it free. It's got to be free. And, for the companies that are trying to do that, like I said, it's shoot the moon. Like, you got to build a lot of capital to do that. And if you don't make it, you lose the whole thing, or your investors will. But if you can get it and you create that one, because, winner takes all, it could be pretty big. Guys, thanks for being with me tonight. It was a real pleasure to meet you all. Thank you.